Okay. So Heather, again, thanks for being with us. Few
Thanks for
years in a
inviting me.
row. We do appreciate. Uh, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, great. So next slide. I wanted to talk to you guys about so the WPA3, which you guys have heard quite a bit about already today, if not before today. And I know that Stephen Cooper did a great presentation to kick your day off. So I guess it's appropriate that I'm going to end your day with a little bit more on WPA3. I wanted to talk with you about this because quite a bit has been said about the Dragonblood vulnerabilities, but mostly from what I can tell from the infosec side of the world, not necessarily explaining it to Wi-Fi people. Um, so I wanted to go over this with you. Again, my name is Heather. Professionally, I go by Mo. I'm a manager at Ruckus for the solutions engineering team. And if you want to see my private snarky comments, you can see me on Twitter. Um, but today, what I wanted to talk about was uh, what Dragonblood is, what it isn't, and how big of a deal is it, and do we need to be worried about it? Next slide. And I forgot where my builds are, so I'll have to. So, the what I wanted to talk with you about is let's first talk about what the vulnerabilities are that have been identified, and let's talk about a little bit of vocabulary. When a vulnerability gets identified, there's a balance between the cost of addressing them versus the cost to the bad actor for actually turning them into an exploit versus what they're going to gain from that. And so that terminology, go ahead and hit it. The first term is trivial versus, go ahead and hit it, non. So for a trivial uh, exploit, we're talking about what we showed up there a second ago, script kiddies. These are this is the low hanging fruit. This is something that somebody who's relatively unskilled, um, and it's almost a derisive term to call people a script kiddie, but it's just something basically anybody could figure out, or actually a lot of times they're just buying a ready-made hack, if you will, and using that to exploit. Go ahead and hit it. So versus a non-trivial where you get a serious actor who's going after it. The real difference is what is the objective? For the most part, we're talking about low-hanging fruit. These guys want to go out, they want to hit quick or hit for the least amount of effort to get the maximum amount of return. Versus if you have an APT, an advanced persistent threat. This is something that either you would be either a huge corporation, a nation state that would be targeted at you, or in some cases nowadays it's significant individual actors such as a CFO. You'll see terms like spearfishing and whaling going after big things like that. So we have to balance between that. And it's important that we have a measured response versus screaming that the sky is falling every time one of these vulnerabilities comes out. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And the reason we want to talk about that is because because of Dragonblood being released by the same researcher that announced the KRACK vulnerability back in October 2017. If you remember, Madi Vanoof made the announcement. He actually announced it at Black Hat USA in July of 2017, and there was a relatively large yawn across the world. But in October, when it went public, for the most part, the InfoSec world and most of the non-vendor Wi-Fi experts had very measured responses and were responsible about it. Other people sort of lost their ever-loving mind. And what ended up happening is that the Monday that the announcement came out, InfoSec people spent and a lot of us Wi-Fi people spent the entire day, like 12 hours straight. I think I lost my voice that day, telling people to calm down. And sometimes some of the responses were not safe for work. They spent the next day being really ticked off about all of the actual attacks that happened on Monday that were not being addressed because of all of the energy being wasted on what was a relatively non-event, and then Tuesday night making fun of the Wi-Fi panic. So if you advance it to the next slide, I'll show you these were some of the responses that you saw on Twitter after KRACK came out. And this is go ahead and go to the next slide. So you have Swift on security telling people, look, Wi-Fi is, again, it's the measure, it's the low-hanging fruit. You've got WEP out there, and you're still not getting hacked. So I think you're gonna be okay. And you have other things to worry about. We have phishing attacks to worry about. And especially this year, we can appreciate how big a deal ransomware attacks are. Go to the next slide. And in fact, Netflix was attacked the day that KRACK was released with a huge phishing attack that had been planned way in advance. And it did not get as much attention just because everybody was still thinking that Wi-Fi had suffered some kind of electromagnetic pulse. Go to the next slide. And then by Tuesday night, they were just absolutely making fun of everybody about everybody losing their mind. So this is, and I went over this. Go ahead and then go to the next slide, because I wanted to talk about my response to when I heard about Dragonblood. I was as guilty as anyone else of saying, basically shooting the messenger. Everybody lost their mind about why KRACK, and so Dragonblood was just more of the same thing. However, again, measured response. What is this, and is it and how important is it? So let's talk about why WPA3 was needed. I know Stephen talked to you a lot about the security behind it, but the reason that it's important is because we're approaching a post-quantum computing world. It's not here yet, but it's going to be, and frankly, we're not going to get a lot of notice. The day it gets cracked is the day that and becomes something that's actually viable, is the day that we're going to need a quantum safe cryptography system in place. And this takes time. I mean, guys, math is hard. Getting a new protocol, look how long it takes us to get something like 11AX, 11AC out. And working. I mean, I don't think that anybody's actually got multi-user MIMO working in a realistic way. The cryptography is even harder, and it takes a lot of time to get it baked and get it right. So we need to get ready for this now, and we need to start working on that. Go ahead and hit it, because I want to show this was a tweet that came out. Matt Blaze is an InfoSec journalist, and this is a tweet actually from this morning, and it was just so appropriate. I had to throw it in here, because what's going to sound like is that I'm going to be the one saying, wow, did these guys who are much smarter than me and know a lot more math and have been working on this for decades, boy, did they get things wrong. And it's going to be real easy for me to be snarky and say, or sound like I'm just criticizing and telling everybody how they got it wrong. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I have a lot of respect for both the InfoSec researchers and the guys behind the cryptography. What I want to do is try to explain to you what it is that the Dragonblood is, why it might be important, and where it could end up being, something that could bite us on the butt. Go to the next slide. So what's the hubbub about? What is it that we're talking about? And specifically, and I know that when Stephen talked to you about WPA3, he went through the whole gamut of not just what's mandatory, but also the optional. And I'm very disappointed that a lot of the things that I was most excited about, such as the Suite B encryption, the OWE, all of that, a lot of that ended up being optional. What Dragonblood is particularly about is just the WPA3 personal. So all of the other parts that you talked about earlier today, we're not going to worry about that right now. So we're talking about just the simultaneous authentication of equals, which is based on the Dragonfly protocol, which is where you get the Dragonblood. Obviously, marketing your vulnerability is InfoSec people are fairly known for coming up with snarky names for things. So in particular, what are the accusations, or what are the allegations about the WPA3 personal? So there's a little bit of he said, she said, and a little bit of pointing fingers at that first bullet. Is it a design flaw, or is it that it was designed perfectly, it's just that different vendors are implementing it incorrectly? And there's a little bit of back and forth on that. So we'll look at that. There are authentication bypasses. So it's actually, there's an ability to bypass authentication. There's a downgrade attack, and then there are what in InfoSec is known as a timing leak or a side channel attack. And this is going to allow offline dictionary and brute force attacks. That in particular is most interesting to me, because if you remember when I stood up last year and talked about WPA3, and I know Stephen mentioned it earlier today, one of the things that we were promised with WPA3 and WPA3 Personal is that it was there to protect even the dumbass passwords. So if you used password 123, you were still going to be safe from a brute force or an offline dictionary attack because of the encryption or the way that WPA3 Personal was going to be implemented. And it turns out that part in particular may not be the case. There's also a denial of service attack that I'm going to talk about briefly, and I want us to be aware of. Go to the next slide. So what is Dragonblood, and why do you care? I just wanted to put this up there. So if any of you guys are not familiar with where to find CVEs, so a CVE is a vulnerability. It's where we cache the vulnerabilities. It gets reported. Any responses to them gets put in. This is something that's important, especially for those of you who are maybe new to Wi-Fi, and I hope at least some of you are, because we need new blood. So as you work towards learning more about Wi-Fi and getting some of those certifications, knowledge of where to find CVEs, where to look these things up, those are kind of some of the things that are expected in the CWSP certification, the Certified Wireless Security Professional. So I just wanted to have that in there. Go ahead and hit it. So Dragonblood in particular is this list of VUs and CVEs. Go ahead and click again. I want to highlight just these three though, because the rest of them that are not highlighted, these are CVEs that are against just the Dragonfly implementation. So this is vendor specific. I think that only a second vendor implemented it to a certain extent. So the ones that aren't highlighted, it only those only apply to the Dragonfly application of the protocol. But the ones that are in yellow are the ones that are that apply to the actual WPA3 implementation. Go ahead and click. So I know that Stephen talked to you guys about this. So what WPA3 is, it's a password authenticated key exchange. It's known as a PAKE. It provides mutual authentication. Go ahead and click, because I've just got some cute little graphics in there. The forward secrecy, click again. And prevention of offline dictionary attacks is the part that is the important thing that we're talking about with the cache and the side channel attacks. And then what it does is that it allows the parties to use the same password and negotiate an authenticated shared key, and that's the negotiated session key. Go ahead and click again. Unfortunately, a lot of PAKEs will allow you to salt your password to prevent server compromises. However, go ahead and click. WPA3 did not, and Dragonfly does not implement that part of it. So we do, but it does allow for the mutual authentication. And remember, all of this happens ahead of the actual four-way handshake that we see in Wi-Fi. Go ahead and click. So this is the SAE handshake for dummies. This is, and again, I promise I'm not going to get down deep in the math. My hand to God, I socially engineered my way through 3 years of college algebra. So I'm going to be the last one to tell you that I'm standing up here being a cryptography expert. My husband is, he's actually quite good. I married up, and I'll just let him handle that part. But at any rate, so the handshake, and again, this is ahead of that four-way handshake that happens in the Wi-Fi association. So this is what happens ahead of time. So the handshake, we have a commit phase. This is where we negotiate the shared key. Click. And then we'll have a confirm phase where we basically confirm that we've negotiated the same one. Go ahead and click again. And then up there, this is the mythical magical math that happens where we're going to convert that password into the group element. And so this is the part where things get a little bit hinky. And I'm just going to, again, I want to talk to you guys like we're not cryptography experts or InfoSec experts, but we're Wi-Fi people. So go ahead and click again. So the math part, there's two crypto groups. So and we'll talk a little bit about each one. The first one is modulo the prime, which is basically we take. I guess you guys are probably all familiar with the idea that cryptography involves this massive, large prime number at some point. Modulo the prime just means that we're going to do some math, and the remainder is what we're going to deal with. Versus an elliptic curve, which means that we're basically going to convert the password to a point on a curve. So we have an X, we have to find, solve for the Y. Go ahead and click again. So remember how I told you I wasn't going to do any real complicated math with you? So that's a math joke right there. I actually literally Googled complicated math formula and just stuck it up there just to scare the heck out of you guys. This has nothing to do with converting the password. The important part is we're going to take a prime, which is the p-value, and then we're going to calculate the hash off of that. Now, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to show you a few things that we're going to be concerned about. One, that as part of the hash, we're using two MAC addresses, the client and the access points MAC address. Some of you might already be raising an eyebrow over that because we all know that MAC addresses can be spoofed. Go ahead and click. We also have to realize that some of these, for some of the groups that are in this modulo, there is a high chance that once you do the calculation, you're going to end up with a number that the remainder would be higher than the prime that we started with, and that would be an invalid calculation. So that means you have to start over again. The response to this problem, I mean, this is a part where the math sort of breaks apart, is to stick a counter in. And if you remember from some of the KRACK problems, counters also end up being a problem. So go ahead and click again. So now we have two MAC addresses. One or more could be spoofed, and we're also going to count. So the number of iterations. So however many times we have to recalculate to come up with a valid hash actually depends on the password. So by adding a counter, the number of iterations that are needed depends on the password that's being used. In cryptography, this is called a channel leak or a timing leak, and it can be used to recover the password. This was actually noted back in 2010 when this was first written, but the response was that they didn't think it was important, and it was a non-trivial attack. And this is why I had that vocabulary lesson for you at the beginning, where a non-trivial attack means that it takes somebody who's really serious and persistent, or knows what they're doing. Unfortunately, that was in 2010, but unfortunately now in 2019, that still exists, and WPA3 was adopted with no timing leak countermeasures in place. So the question becomes, but can you really recover the password? I mean, really? Can you really? So go to the next slide and we'll talk about how the timing, and again, I'm not dumbing it down to the point of it being wrong. I'm dumbing it down to the point where I can understand what I'm talking about. So for those of you who truly are math whizzes, I apologize for for this. And by the way, remember that this is Matti van Oof's research that I'm sort of taking and trying to explain. This is not my work, and I don't want to in any way, shape, or form take credit for having discovered any of this. So the timing leak looks like this. So we'll take a client address, we'll just spoof an address, and we run it through the hash. So we have a measured response, and then we'll try a couple of passwords, and we can see what it looks like. How many times did it take? So it only took one pass for password 1. So that's probably not the password. Password 2 could be, password 3 could be. So we're going to take a look at and see how many times we have to spoof a client address to obtain a different execution and get new data. Go ahead and click again. So then we'll try it again with address B. Go ahead and click. And so we can see with password 1 is now, we're looking for the preponderance of evidence. And it looks like the password 1 just isn't the correct one. Go ahead and click. And we'll just keep doing this until we come up with enough information that we can be relatively certain that this is the correct password. Go ahead and click. And what this is called is, or what this is going to look like, go ahead and click, is it will end up with a fingerprint of what the password is. And so what this is just again, it's the preponderance of evidence. Go ahead and click. So how non-trivial is this? I mean, if you have a really large dictionary, how many times do you have to do this? Well, it turns out that if you have a password from the rock you dump, and I know you all are saying to yourselves, the rock you dump was 2009. We all know that these are the dumbest passwords to use, and yet the truth is that those passwords are still in use. And remember what WPA3 promised us. It was going to protect even the dumbasses of the world. Their non-secure, 1234567 password was going to be safe. And it turns out that after just 17 iterations, it's if you have one of those passwords, it's so it basically is a non-trivial. I'm leaving this slide up here just so you can make a note. If any of you guys are even slightly interested in becoming an InfoSec junkie, I really do recommend the Darknet Diaries podcast. It's incredibly well done and very entertaining. The episode 33 is the one that talks about the RockU attack and how that happened, and just sort of the backstory. A lot of people know about the RockU dump. Not a lot of people know the history of it, and so I just wanted to give you guys that. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page so I can scare you some more. So I told you that we were talking about the mod P. The other way is to do an elliptic curve. And again, we've got a point X, we're solving for a point Y. You can see that I'm going to have to find a square root of X cubed plus AX plus B. That's the limit of my understanding of algebra, by the way, guys. The problem is that not every square root of a number like that is going to be a valid number. So you're going to end up with, just like with the mod P, you'll end up having to introduce a counter in order to make sure that you can rehash if you come up with an invalid password or a hash of the password. So the thing that they did with the elliptic curve is they mandated that there would always be 40 iterations. So there's no way of knowing when the password was actually calculated. And so therefore there's no chance of having a side channel attack. So that's good. The bad thing is that 40 iterations is computationally expensive. And Madi demonstrated in the lab that consumer grade APs and especially lower end clients like IoT devices are especially vulnerable. Forging 8 connections a second saturates an AP's CPU. I don't know that he actually tested this against a consumer grade access point. In fact, I know that he didn't. But it's not a lot to assume that this was something that we might want to consider, that this could end up being a problem. If you don't use the elliptic curve, the NIST elliptic curve, you use the brain pool, that actually causes all kinds of problems, and that has now been retroactively taken out. Actually, when that was first pointed out, literally the response was from the creators of this was, "Oh yeah, we forgot to mention, don't use brain pool elliptic curves." So again, there's a little bit of finger pointing about whether this is a design flaw versus an implementation flaw. So I'll let you guys make of that what you will. Go ahead and go to the next one. So the cache attacks that the elliptic curve is vulnerable to. This is a separate attack that I haven't gone into the details of, and I'll send you guys some links that I actually have a couple of resources. There's a really good and something even I could understand the explanation. There's a really good YouTube on what a cache attack is and explaining even the math behind it at a level that is fairly approachable. So I'll get that link out to you guys if anyone's interested. So the cache attacks are non-trivial, but there are ways to optimize it and make it more efficient. So yeah, the bad actor has to be within Wi-Fi range. And I put that in quotes because we all know that Wi-Fi range can vary, especially with depending on the antenna type and how motivated the bad actor is. There are some other requirements that are there, but optimizing it turns out to be trivial. So for example, $1 worth of processing power on Amazon EC2 instances gets you effectively gets you 10 to the 10th passwords. So that's a large dictionary. It's actually larger than all known password leaks. It's larger than the RockU database dump. It's larger than all the passwords in Have I Been Pwned, and that's $1. If you're using the ModP or Brainpool, all iterations, all 256 iterations of the 8 characters, it's $67. Now, if you're using the NIST elliptic curves, that's going to get more expensive. It's $14,000. But the researchers' point, and I don't disagree with that, is that we're supposed to be creating a protocol that's getting us ready, or it's the next step to getting us ready for post-quantum cryptography. In 2019, with a brand new protocol, it shouldn't even be possible, let alone $14,000. And I know I don't have $14,000 I'm going to spend to hack your password. But if I thought that you were, say, for instance, somebody who was the CFO of a company that I was considering um, running some kind of a phishing campaign, it might very well be worth it. I think it was how many millions of dollars did Ubiquity get tricked out of with a phishing campaign just a couple of years ago? So these are things that that we sort of need to consider. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So let's talk about the hubbub revisited. And of course, I have a typo because I can't spell hubbub. Let's talk about what the accusations were versus what the reality is. So we had the design versus implementation flaws. Go ahead and just click through because I have a couple of graphics here. And one more. Okay, stop there. So the design versus implementation, there were on both sides. Yes, there were some poor implementations at first, but on the other hand, there were also some things in the actual design itself that were noted back at the beginning that sort of they didn't think were important and maybe now are. Authentication bypasses, that applies only to the Dragonfly application of it, not to the WPA3, so we're good there. The downgrade attacks actually, and we didn't talk about that, but I know Stephen talked about running in mixed mode so that you could, if you had clients that were not able to support WPA3, it would support WPA2. This actually led to a possibility for downgrade attacks. You could actually trick the client in telling them that they had to use WPA2. And of course, the researcher, since he's the discoverer of KRACK, doesn't think a whole lot of WPA2. And WPA3 is a more secure protocol. Those have now been mitigated to prevent the downgrade attack. The timing leaks are sort of mitigated. You just need to make sure that you're not the brain pool curves. The problem is that it does with the 40 iterations, it absolutely can lead to a denial of service attack. And I can see that somebody who was motivated, and especially if you've got a network full of IoT devices, this could actually be something that could end up being quite serious. So the bottom line is the Wi-Fi standard is now being updated. So we have WPA3 out. What is the big question that I'm sure you guys are all asking is, what does that mean? Are we going to have WPA 3.1? And the answer is, I don't know. They haven't made up their mind whether there's going to be a 3.1 or how it is that they're going to roll that out, and more importantly, how they're going to market it. The more problematic part is that that none of that is backwards compatible. So there's going to have to be some updates. And what I'm mostly concerned about is any of the client devices that are being rolled out that won't end up being upgraded or cannot be upgraded. And again, go ahead and go to the next slide, because one of the things that I want to point out that I'm very concerned about is, and this is an old cartoon and it's funny because it's talking about the Internet of Things versus ransomware. Ransomware is a huge problem and it's gotten bigger. And the reason it's gotten bigger is because it pays. I mean, they're making money at it. There's all kinds of things in the news about the municipalities that stand up and make a stand and don't pay. But in the reality is, on the back end, there's an awful lot of entities that are paying, and it all goes down to that low hanging fruit. Go ahead and click again. Because this again was a tweet that came out this morning that I thought was just too appropriate. How many pen testers does it take to change a smart light bulb? And the answer is none. There was a really good presentation. If you guys haven't seen it, it's online from Wi-Fi Trek that Peter McKenzie did about how to design for a. He was in a network at a university, and he needed to design to include smart light bulbs, smart lighting fixtures. Nobody in the audience asked if he should do it. They all wanted to know how to do it. And some of these things are quite concerning, especially with the attacks that are coming out. So again, I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about what's going on and how the Dragonblood actually is not KRACK part Deux. Isn't something that was trivial. It was something that we probably needed to take in consideration. The Wi-Fi Alliance has done the appropriate thing in responding. Go ahead and click so that I can just say thank you. And I think that it does get us a little bit further down the road. I think I'm a little disappointed in some of the things that came out. And there are a couple of things, especially with the denial of service, that I think that we are going to need to consider, especially as we start having to troubleshoot some of these implementations. And with that, I think I actually ran overtime, but not as overtime as I should have.
You did great. You did great. Thanks. Let's have a hand for you. So Heather, thank you, man.
Thank you guys.